It's a pleasure to be here speaking in this course, giving class in this course organized by Fiocruz and health planning. And we're going to speak especially about global health and mainly about the population dynamics and health conditions of the population, emphasizing in Latin America. The target of this module is to present an international framework of the health conditions, globally speaking, emphasizing on Latin America and the challenges and the determinants faced by this population. Mainly, we will highlight some problems that have to be faced by multilateral population. The general plan is to give a small introduction, to speak about the demographic dynamics, and afterwards speak about social determinants in health, and then social transformations, environmental and technological, and risks in the health, trends and current situation, and a brief conclusion. Well, the first thing that I would like to mention to you and to think about it is about the health conditions of the population, the great determinants. Normally, there's a debate and debates about two great determinant groups that condition the conditions of health. A biological one, that is everything regarding the mechanisms of diseases and the biological factors involved in the health issues, and another great group that are the great social determinants and environmental determinants and technological ones. I believe that we, from collective and public health, we have to face this set of problems as integrated in a traditional vision and considered antagonic. Another subject that I want to emphasize, this chart in the below part of the slide, is how the population notices these health conditions. This is something very complex, of complex understanding, and the great health problems are not noticed very clearly by the population. Many times, other problems are noticed very quickly by the population. That happens with epidemics, for example, the great epidemics and infectious diseases, as we see now about Ebola, where in spite of happening in Africa, the risk of disseminating to other areas of the world has created attention, globally speaking. And sometimes a daily problem in the population that cause great loads of diseases not so clearly or immediately noticed. So this is a first issue that we have a difficulty in being able to manage what is a problem in health of the population. We also have some other problems generated by the knowledge. We have the knowledge about specific problems and relative knowledge about other problems, and some very little knowledge about other issues. This generates a possibility that to some problems, the researchers can estimate more clearly about the risks that these problems have for the population, and others, we have some uncertainty in the estimates and the risks, mainly the long-term estimates. In certain areas, we have ignorance, little knowledge, and capability of being able to predict. So these are elements that we have to consider in our moment of thinking and estimating about current and future problems in the health of the population. I would like to start firstly about demographic transformations in the world. We have to consider this because part of the transformations in demography have effects in health and direct implications in health, and we should be concerned, obviously, with this. One is the population growth. Some decades ago, it was very intense in the developing countries. And as you can observe here in the graphs, this has decreased a lot. Now the developed countries, the growth is almost zero, and in some parts it's a negative growth. So a decrease in the growth of the population. In other countries, we have a slight growth, like in great part of Latin America nowadays, and some have an intense growth, as you can see now in the graph. Some African countries, for example, that have an intense population growth. So this is an issue that obviously generates problems that we have to consider when we estimate, for example, the requirements for future health of a population. Another issue is the migration. The human population displaces itself to other places of the world, and this is very important in the dynamic of the diseases. This is very clear in the infectious diseases. For example, in the Middle Age in Europe, the cholera used to reach Europe through the navigation and trade, mainly with Asia, for example, and it made it possible that people and infected animals would transmit the etiological agent of the cholera and transmit the cholera in the European continent. This happened in Latin America also during the colonization. Many diseases that we have nowadays came from that time, from Africa or from Europe. But at the current moment, these procedures continue. Great populational movements continue. We have now the recent displacement of population from Syria and other population of the Middle East to Europe. And obviously this has a number of political, economic, and social implications, and also in the health area. These populations have demands and requirements in different ways. I want to remind you some examples. For example, Latin America is not a great immigrant interest, but a lot of displacements between nations or two nations that are very important. And we have some cases of displacements, externally speaking, that have implications. For example, the Chagas disease is typical of Latin America, that nowadays is under control in the great amount of the Latin American continent. But nevertheless, the patients that have chronic ways of this disease are in the contingents of immigrants of Latin America that reach countries like United States and Europe. And these people, they transmit the chronic way of the Chagas disease, and they go to these countries and create specific demands in the health field as a patient that has a very severe disease, that is the Chagas chronic disease. So these are problems that we have to consider in the international discussion, because it's very dynamic and obviously is being modified every moment. Something else I want to emphasize is urbanization, the growth of the population and the displacement of the rural population to the urban centers have generated great cities and great metropolis with all the implications, environmentally speaking, that generate many things in the health field. In a great city, not only the health determinants are modified, but also the organization of the health system has to be re-systemized to comply with the population that is living in the great cities. And the trend that you see in the lower part of the slide, the trend in Latin America, the Caribbean, you can notice that explanation that in a very few time we have about 90% of our population living in urban zones. This will create an expectation that we have to consider in the current moment and in the future. Another process of the population is the age of the population. I would like to also highlight this. It's very discussed in the media and other networks. The aging generates new health problems. Obviously, the aging is not a synonym of disease, but we have to highlight that obviously there is a set of diseases that are more frequent while the human body gets older. So all the discussion about a healthy aging and all the implications of the aging to the health system have to be considered vis-a-vis that we are in an intense process. And you can see in these maps the prediction for these century. People over 60 years old will grow a lot in the next decades. And I would like to speak now about the social determinants. I'm not going to give a lot of highlight to these biological issues. I think for our discussion, this is not very important, but I would like to strengthen an aspect that is very important, the inequality, social inequality, especially the differences that exist in each population in terms of access to services that make these population go through sufferings and have standards of different diseases, sometimes in the same city or in the same state or the same country. Here, to show you the inequality internationally speaking. The human society and the countries have different degrees of distribution of their wealth and the access to their wealth. And mainly, the region of Latin America and Caribbean have a great amount of concentration of wealth. And here's a map showing the Gini index is developed by economists that measures the concentration of this wealth in human population. And you can see that this index could go from 0 to 1. 0 would be total distribution, 1 would be total concentration. And you can see that Latin America, we have always the Gini index over 50. So it's badly distributed, and we should have it under 20 or around between 20 to 30, not more than 30, and R is around 50 to 60. We have great advances in the last decade in order to reduce these numbers here in Latin America and in the Caribbean, but we still maintain an international standard of great inequality. This has great implications in the health area. Firstly, because it affects other determinants of life. You can see in the lower graph the IDH, Human Development Index. It is very helpful that it gives you an idea how populations of a specific country or area live. Here you can see that Latin America, we are in the average of this distribution. The illiteracy rates have improved a lot, but we still have a number of actions to be followed. And if we consider two classical determinants linked to health that are access to fresh water and sanitation, I think these are very important problems. On one side, access to water has increased a lot, and we have a great amount of the population in the Americas have access to fresh water, clean water, and this is a warranty for health. But when we consider basic sanitation, this is not so good. We are still in a level that still requires a lot of public policies and investment to reach a satisfactory level. So the implication of all this, and what we have nowadays as evidence that the inequality, socially speaking, not only feed this unequal distribution of a number of resources of the society, this will bring an implication directly to the health. So we believe the reduction of social inequality, when it affects directly a number of parameters of the life condition of the population, it can have direct actions in the field of health.
And this is clearly analyzed in social health policies, a series of social policies have shown being effective in the field of health when these policies are properly implemented. We do have income transfer policies. These policies today are commonly found in Latin America and the Caribbean and other countries in the world, basically in developing countries, and some of these policies, like in the case of income transfer, that have direct effects on health. So social policies actually help, and through complex mechanisms, to affect the health status of the population, improving some of these indicators. We see a study showing the effects in reducing child mortality rates. But the world is in motion. There are a series of issues that are taking place. I would like to stress a few items that do affect health. Changes underway in the technological and environmental fields, and some risks that pre-existed that are still underway, actually added to a series of factors that do affect health in the population. Here, the upper graphs show how these risks are displaced in time as we have transformed the society, introducing new technologies, new industrial models, new types of interventions in nature. This has generated new problems that increasingly more stop being just local problems and they become actually general problems for the population. Let's start with smoking. Tobacco consumption is an important cause of problems in health. This is recognized. The WHO calculates that millions of deaths are directly linked to smoking on an annual basis. Despite big efforts made by countries, international efforts trying to actually curb smoking or illegal use in illegal circulation of this product, still we have all these control policies that many countries have implemented, some successfully. We have seen yet, globally speaking, tobacco consumption has decreased very slightly, but it's at stable levels, showing once again that a problem that has been known for over 50 years, that has a direct negative impact on the population, the international community, and local actions have been insufficient in order to control the problem. And we have more general problems too. I would quote two general problems created by the new technologies. One is the use of antibiotics, the use of these antibiotics in terms of antimicrobial resistance. This resistance is known by the irrational use or the broad use of antibiotics and uses that were not the original objective. For example, the use of antibiotics actually in animal breeding has prompted the level of emergence of existence of bacteria over the parasites have turned into a mankind problem, and it's a key concern. It's a priority, considering the possibility of having multi-resistance forms, antibiotics, of new bacteria, of microbia in general, is increasing. And this, recently we have had examples of the situation, which is a very big concern and demands global action. Here we have also greenhouse gas effects and global warming. When calculating this long-term process, there's a possibility of having big disruptions in climate effects, actually affecting the health environment, bringing actually back old diseases, and also there's a worsening of existing diseases. There are new problems that can be emerging because of the issue of global warming. Also, this chart summarizes this mechanism, and we have to include for antimicrobial resistance global warming as big issues related to health that create international warnings, despite being different problems that have different origin, but this cause actual effects on the global sphere. I would like to talk about health, the health situation at global level, with an emphasis also in Latin America, starting by basic issues. Hunger and child mortality have been two classic indicators that have been used to give us an idea of health conditions in the population. We can see, in terms of hunger, there have been significant reductions in Latin America. Today, still, there are problems in this field of action, but the reductions have been made thanks to national or international policies that have been effective in order to reduce actually this problem. The same thing goes with child mortality. We have levels of mortality, child mortality, that cannot be compared against developed countries yet, but definitely, if we are to compare ourselves historically, there have been significant reductions in terms of mortality rate. But if you're going to be seeing an indicator that could be any of the health indicators, here we are using life expectancy. Despite having reductions in these indicators, we have to see that there's a clear relationship between these indicators and the economic conditions of the population. Here down below, we have the actually GDP per capita, and we have the life expectancy in the y-axis. We see this relationship. There is increase in GDP per capita. There is an increase in the life expectancy of the population. This shows it actually strong links between the social and economic development of the population, and is a classic indicator as life expectancy. In terms of the most specific health problems, in our situation, we still have different types of problems. I would like to stress three big series of problems that are discussed separately, generally, but should be integrated to do the analysis of basic determinant factors. First, we have infectious diseases in Latin America. They're still having great impact. We have examples of dengue, that several countries have had important epidemics of dengue fever, Hansen's disease, which is an important and old disease, has been extinguished in the developed countries, but is still prevalent in some developing countries in Latin America, especially in Brazil, for example. Still do have prevalence levels above what could be accepted, and we have TB as an example of problems beyond actually actions that have been undertaken. There is still an incidence. Now we go to chronic diseases that emerge, which have been emerging for several decades. Chronic diseases, once again, is not something new in Latin America. In some countries, for some decades already, mortality related to chronic diseases, more important than mortality due to infectious diseases, is a problem that's still growing, and that it's added today to other big problems that are actually being transformed in the population. We have the emergence of obesity as a problem that is closely linked to nutrition, and on the way how the food industry is producing and distributing food products for the population, and the big emergence of diabetes as an important disease. And it's intensely growing. Future projections of diabetes prevalence show that there will be a peak. And finally, I would like to talk about homicides. This is a series of important problems that do directly affect actually several regions in the world, especially Latin America. So we can see here the map comparison mortality rate for homicides, and we see that Latin America actually has a bad situation that brings a series of implications in terms of the life of this society, on how the society is being organized, on how the society sees the risks in terms of its survival, and obviously this is closely linked to another important aspect, which is what just we mentioned, that are the social determinants on health. Possible explanations can be given to this violence in Latin America that find an explanation actually in the field of social determinants and also social inequalities. This allows us to have a vision of the problems that are very complex, but in all, those are forces that act to contain improvements in the health of the populations in this continent. Obviously, policies, clear-cut policies that they will bring about benefits in this field of action should integrate actually this type of policies in the three areas. I would like to stress once again, the graphic down below talks about violence is a global problem that is multiplied because of armed conflicts and other type of conflicts. But Latin America is better off compared again other regions of the world. We can see actually the degree of armed conflicts in our continent is very low compared to other countries in the world. Finally, I would just like to talk about the conclusions or the responses. This will be detailed by our other panelists, but I just wanted to resume the information I gave you and the importance this information gave to be integrated so that to prepare more clear-cut designs of the problems that we have, so these problems might be properly faced at international level, and the multilateral agencies have made important efforts, and the countries also that have brought along important effects. But seeing their situation, they have not been sufficient in order to be facing the problem. And these responses happen at different levels, although they are not coordinated many times. For example, social determinants are dealt on one way, antimicrobial resistance is dealt differently, smoking control, tobacco control is discussed differently, climate changes is focused differently, the control of epidemics and greater risks for the population have a different focus. There are a series of documents and international initiatives that try to tackle these problems, but they're incomplete. And there's no coordination, and there's no integration because it would be for a better outcome. Obviously enough, the final responses will be given at local and at national level too. Be it the countries by themselves are going to be preparing the policies in order to be facing these problems. And some have been successful. We have examples in Latin America, some violence control programs that have been extremely effective in controlling violence. We have seen also reduction of some health problems, like the improvement of child health. Also, in terms of nutrition in Latin America, there have been policies that have been very efficient. The control of tobacco consumption or smoking have been very efficient, but we have been unable of controlling other problems. The emergence of obesity, of violence at general level have not been properly resolved yet. Obviously, also, all these international actions put together with national and local policies are going to be defining this situation in the future. Obviously, these are complex discussions. They will demand governmental actions at local and national levels from multilateral agencies that would be coordinated and exchanging information among the different countries so that these information might be used in order to transform the reality that, despite showing positive aspects, still also represent big challenges for the near and for the long-term future of the population. Thank you very much. And this debate goes on with the other classes.